Hi, I'm Rebecca Balcarcel, and I want to read to you a short story called Sticks by George Saunders and then analyze it. It's only 2 paragraphs long, so I'm excited that I can just share the whole thing with you. Okay, Sticks. Every year, Thanksgiving night, we flocked out behind Dad as he dragged the Santa suit to the road and draped it over a kind of crucifix he'd built out of metal pole in the yard. Super Bowl week, the pole was dressed in a jersey and Rod's helmet, and Rod had to clear it with Dad if he wanted to take the helmet off. On the 4th of July, the pole was Uncle Sam. On Veterans Day, a soldier. On Halloween, a ghost. The pole was Dad's only concession to glee. We were allowed a single Crayola from the box at a time. One Christmas Eve, he shrieked at Kimmy for wasting an apple slice. He hovered over us as we poured ketchup, saying, "Good enough, good enough, good enough." Birthday parties consisted of cupcakes, no ice cream. The first time I brought a date over, she said, "What's with your dad and that pole?" And I sat there blinking. We left home, married, had children of our own, found the seeds of meanness blooming also within us. Dad began dressing the pole with more complexity and less discernible logic. He draped some kind of fur over it on Groundhog Day and lugged out a floodlight to ensure a shadow. When an earthquake struck Chile, he lay the pole on its side and spray painted a rift in the earth. Mom died, and he dressed the pole as death and hung from the crossbar photos of Mom as a baby. We'd stop by and find odd talismans from his youth arranged around the base. Army medals, theater tickets, old sweatshirts, tubes of Mom's makeup. One autumn, he painted the pole bright yellow. He covered it with cotton swabs that winter for warmth and provided offspring by hammering in 6 crossed sticks around the yard. He ran lengths of string between the pole and the sticks and taped to the string letters of apology, admissions of error, pleas for understanding, all written in a frantic hand on index cards. He painted a sign saying love and hung it from the pole, and another that said forgive, and then he died in the hall with the radio on, and we sold the house to a young couple who yanked out the pole and the stakes and left them by the road on garbage day. And that's the whole story. Okay, so when I analyze fiction, I think a lot about the elements of fiction, which are, setting, plot, the author's style, like the way they use words and language, character for sure, theme, symbolism. These are the kind of building blocks, recipe, ingredients, I guess, for all fiction, typical fiction anyway. So this story, I feel like, really is interesting from a couple of those angles, theme, symbolism, and character especially. So I want to look at those. We meet this man, just to kind of recap the plot. We hear from one of the children, apparently is narrating and telling us about the father. And he says, well, even as kids, every Thanksgiving night, we flocked out behind Dad. So, like, all the kids are like little chicks following Dad to put the Santa suit on this crucifix type of a thing. I'm picturing sort of a clothesline type crossbar that he'd built out of metal pole in the yard. Now, of course, crucifix immediately sends our minds to Christianity and its main symbol of sacrifice, the crucifix, a cross. And, Jesus is known, the Christian, guru, messiah, prophet person. Jesus is known as someone who is especially compassionate and especially generous. There's stories about miracles of generosity and plenty. But this man is very much not like that, right? This man is quite odd. And one of the things we learn about him is that this stick becomes like one of the only ways he can express himself, because this narrator goes on and says that the Santa suit was on this cross piece of metal in the yard during Christmas, and then Super Bowl week it was dressed with a jersey. So we have American football kind of honored, celebrated, and the helmet used, the football helmet used, is actually the kids, one of the kids named Rod, and dad is using his son's helmet. And in fact, the kid cannot have the helmet back or use it until dad says it's okay. So that's sort of strange, isn't it? And then 4th of July, Uncle Sam, and all these holidays where the stick gets, or the crucifix gets decorated. And while plenty of people have seasonal decorations, including me, this is a particularly strange way to, kind of participate in society or in the rituals of society, like holidays, especially when you get to like Groundhog's Day. That's not one that I'm usually putting up a whole bunch of decorations in my yard for. So the dad is a little quirky, but also we have this very important sentence. The pole was dad's only concession to glee. Glee meaning happiness or joy. And this pole was the one thing that the dad got excited about, or who he would admit that there should be joy and happiness in our lives. And then we get examples of how he acted in other areas of life. So the girl Kimmy wasted an apple slice and he shrieked at her, it says. And then birthday parties, they don't get cake and ice cream, they have cupcakes. So everything is controlled and rationed out. I wonder if they're poor or if the man is just very regimented. Then there's another example, the ketchup. So they can't just put as much ketchup as they want. They have to ration it out, and just a little bit of ketchup, and then he's already trying to stop them. That's good enough. That's enough ketchup. Don't use too much ketchup. So in day-to-day life, this man is strict, not letting the kids have a lot of pleasure, enjoyment. It's quite, it feels restrained. And then when our narrator brings a date over, she's confused, like, what's up with that pole in the yard? Why is that, such a focus for the dad? And we wonder the same thing. The narrator's kind of used to it, like, yeah, that's dad's pole. But we as outsiders, along with the date, this person is coming to see the family and sees the weirdness of it or the unusualness of it. And then the next paragraph is all about what happened to the family in the future. He says, we left home, married, or actually I'm not sure it's he, but the narrator says they, had children of their own. And then an important line, found the seeds of meanness blooming also within us. And the seeds of meanness, it sounds like the father's meanness is blooming in the children. Like he has passed down this perspective on life, or this way of life, to the kids. Now, meanness partly means being, not nice, but it also means being, like if something is mean, it is reduced, it is barely enough. Like someone who lives in mean circumstances means that they don't have enough money, they struggle to survive. So the meanness that's blooming in them may have both of those meanings, of kind of frugality to an extreme, like being very penny pinching, but also not emotionally engaged, or not allowing for happiness, really. It sounds kind of like a bleak life that they had, and that they're carrying that forward into their lives as adults and even as parents. Like, so I said we were going to kind of recap the plot, but I keep going into symbols and meanings of words, and I think now I'm going to veer into theme and mention that this idea that how kids are raised affects their adult lives is quite pronounced here, this very clear message here, and that the kids can't totally escape how they were raised, even though looking back, it seems like they can tell that it was extreme, you know. But anyway, the child grows up and becomes a parent that is similar to how they were parented. That's very typical. And, you know, individual people will make a big effort to parent very differently than their parents, but in this case, this family, it gets passed down. So then in this future time, dad's starting to dress the pole like for the Groundhog Day, and you know, when there's an earthquake in Chile, another country, he's like commemorating that with the pole. It seems like he is participating in the world through the pole, and that's his way of communicating too. Even when the mom dies, um, the pole is involved. So the pole is dressed like death, and there's like artifacts or like memorabilia of the mother, photos of the mom as a baby, it says. So maybe this pole is also how he copes with emotion. You know, we see him like kind of a clamped down, regimented person, and maybe expression of grief is also done through the pole because that's all he knows. Or the pole has just become this vehicle for him that he can use to send a message to the world and to respond to the world and to be emotionally, yeah, present. I mean, he's not emotionally present for his kids in other ways, but the pole, like, that's where it all goes. Like, all his emotional energy is going into the pole. Okay, so then what happens? Then he starts putting things from his youth. Maybe he's starting to realize that at the end of his life, he wants to like commemorate his army medals, theater tickets, sweatshirts, mom's makeup. So the the earlier stages of his life, he's now bringing those to the pole, and the army medals really clues us into one aspect of his personality. That if he is a veteran, then he may look at life, you know, colored by or through the lens of his experience as a military person. And we don't know whether he was in a particular war or whatnot, but any military service does maybe lend itself to this idea of life being a little more rigid or regimented or segmented. People in the military have to very much learn how to control their emotions so they can be effective in their duties. So maybe that is like coming into his family life where he can't turn off that sort of on duty feeling. I'm kind of drawing some conclusions here. I'm trying to infer some things given all the ingredients here. Yeah, I don't know. So army medals might be a piece of evidence. We could say, look, this might make him, you know, have shaped him. One autumn, he painted the pole bright yellow and then covered it with swabs for the winter. So he's marking the seasons using the pole. And then we finally get to the sticks. Now, the title of the story is Sticks. What are the sticks? It's actually not the pole. It's little sticks that he hammers into the ground, 6 of them, it says, provided the pole some offspring like children. So there's 6 baby poles but around the yard, and there are strings now linking the main pole to the little baby poles to the sticks. So obviously this feels like a major symbol of himself and his kids, and it's kind of too late for him to connect to them, but now he's got a physical string connecting him to the little sticks, and then he's putting on those strings, it says letters of apology. So he's saying he's sorry, but not directly to them, but on letters that are put on the strings. And also admissions of error. So admitting to having done some things wrong, admitting to mistakes. Please, Pleas, that means not please and thank you, but a plea, a begging for understanding, all written in a frantic hand on index cards. So he frantically wants to fix what he damaged as a parent. He can tell that the way he raised his kids was, didn't foster a lot of emotional connection and ease and joy and love, outwardly anyway. But he's trying to now convey it in this way, and he even paints a sign that says love. And in the story, it's all capital letters, love, and he hung it from the pole. So he's saying, I do have love. I'm a person who wants to give love, even. And then there's another sign that says forgive, and it's also all caps, and it has a question mark. So he's asking forgiveness from the kids, but again, not directly, only through this sign on the string on the pole, and in that same sentence, we just get the whole ending of his life, very unceremoniously, kind of like the sentence just goes on from the word forgive, and then he died in the hall with the radio on, and we sold the house, as if the narrator doesn't give it much weight or importance. The narrator doesn't stop and say, and that's when we mended our relationship with our father. No, it's just, and then he died, and then some other people bought the house, and they threw out the pole, and it went to the garbage, which feels like such a. I mean, in a way, it's time goes on, right? So new people come to the house. There's new life in the house, and that's actually kind of nice, maybe. But their family never did make peace, and so it feels sort of sad and kind of tragic to me to think about the pole being out there on the curb ready for the trash, and the little sticks and the notes and this. It seems like the wreckage of a life that was kind of a full of mistakes anyway, in terms of the family dynamics and the emotion. The kids don't seem to treasure this. They didn't go get the pole. I mean, do you even want the pole? It does feel kind of tragic though. Okay, so there's the story, and we kind of walked through the whole thing. But let's think about character for one of those elements of fiction. So, of course, the man himself is the main character. He changes. He starts out, we get the snapshot of how he is as a parent, so cautious about one crayon at a time, one apple slice you can't waste, that kind of person. And then he becomes this person who's expressing himself through this pole. Okay, so he has changed. He has gotten to feel maybe guilty or regretful about how he was as a dad. It seems to come too late though, because the seeds of meanness have already started to bloom in the kids, and maybe that's what triggers this transformation. That he sees how his kids are kind of carrying on this meanness, and he wants to express himself now, even though it's like the die has been cast. He lost his chance to really influence his kids because now they're grown up. But he definitely goes through a change, and he comes to be more in touch with his emotions, but through this device of the pole. So I feel sad for this man. I feel like he has potential. Maybe if they could somehow have had a therapy session or something, or just a deep conversation, they could have found more connection, more love. But it seems like it's so late that he starts to reach out, and when he does reach out, it's in this very peculiar way, and the kids can't really connect and respond. It's too late. So for sure, that main character, I feel for him, and I feel for the life he must have had before he had kids. We know he was in the army, but there's also theater tickets. We understand he likes football, so we're getting a sense that of a richer person, but it just doesn't get expressed, or it doesn't get appreciated by the kids. I don't think it's the kids' fault. I think it's that they were, because of how they were raised, they were not taught to have open-heartedness or trust. They were taught to be super closed and frugal and tight about things. And now, yeah, it's a tragic story, I think, except in the sense that at least the man discovers in himself some emotional life and tries to act on it. Okay, so we also have characters. The narrator is a character, and because of how perfunctory, how casual that whole last sentence is, like, and then he died and the radio was on, and blah blah blah, it really gets across a feeling of someone who reports on the strangeness of the father and the difficulty of their upbringing, and then just doesn't really have much else to say except to say, well, here's how it ended, here's how it went with him. But the main character never expresses a lot of compassion for the father or deep understanding. So that character feels kind of flat to me. The narrator is just reporting, really, almost on a stranger, except to say that growing up was hard with this person. And the other kids don't have a big role except to be just named. And then the young couple who comes along and buys the house, we don't meet them, but we know that they're the means by which the pole is gotten rid of, and, time marches forward. And does it ever even matter that this man was there and went through all this trouble about the pole? It doesn't matter to the couple, the young couple who, fresh start, newness, hope. They're the hope. Everything else is kind of bleak. Yes. Okay, so there's character. Symbols, of course, the pole. It's in the shape of a crucifix, and I mentioned sacrifice and the Jesus, the Christ figure of someone who gives their life for others. And I kind of wonder if a man's emotional life was sacrificed, as he became the kind of man who was very closed and clenched. And then it was through the crucifix that he's able to start to express. So maybe that crucifix is a symbol of what died in him, and it doesn't get kind of resurrected until the end of the story and the end of this man's life. And actually by then the kids are set in their ways, and so it doesn't make a transformation that's as huge as what a religious figure does. But this man did, like, part of himself died, and he tried to resurrect it in this way. So yeah, maybe that's part of why the word crucifix is used to describe the pole. I think the pole itself, even aside from this comparison to a crucifix, is for sure his inner life exteriorized, like how he feels about Chile and the earthquake, how he feels about Christmas. It gets expressed on the pole. So the vehicle of the pole is, the pole itself is his emotional life, like put outside. His communication with the world is the pole. His communication with his children is the pole. So it's his way of expressing. Yeah. Um, so that's got to be the biggest symbol, kind of the most obvious thing. Um, yeah, so we've got character, symbolism. The style is quite, like I was saying, reporty, like a reporter almost. The narrator is not getting introspective or thoughtful or gushy with us, but just kind of laying out the facts. And that kind of fits the theme of which is what I think that the theme is how emotional deadness is is something that does damage the family. It damages your relationships. It damages you. And the 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 way the wording is done is quite cold, and the man is cold until the pole and the death of his wife and like the passage of time. He's at the end of his life. He starts to be warmer, but by this point he's unable to actually call up his kids or have a family gathering. Instead, he's just trying to apologize to them through a note, through a sign. It's not a very effective way to communicate. So I feel like the theme does have to do with how, if you, you live with the consequences of your own kind of mental and emotional baggage. Like it does get passed down, and it affects your connections with other people, with the world. Yeah, is there some hope? I guess the fact that he does change, yes. So maybe part of the theme is that you can try to save yourself, even if it's too late to repair everything with other people. But at least you can try to be in conversation with yourself and start to reflect and start to change. Maybe that's a theme. When I think of theme, I think of like, what is the author trying to leave us with in terms of a message about life or about, parenting, or about relationships, about emotions, about how the past affects your present and then your future. So I think this story, it makes me feel that it's very important to express to your loved ones directly, if you can, if there's any possible way. I feel like also one of the messages is have some compassion for people who are not able to communicate their emotions well or can't express themselves in an outward way. Realize that they may have actually a lot going on internally. Yeah. So those are a couple of takeaways for me from this poem, kind of life lessons. Yeah. And honor your emotional life, you know, even if you have duties and roles like being in the army or being, we all have different places and maybe professional things in our lives where we have to guard ourselves. And maybe in certain relationships, we have to guard ourselves. But when we're out of that situation, condition, if we can try to open, if possible, then it seems like this story is saying that would be a good thing. Yeah. Okay, wow. That's a lot. We got a lot out of 2 paragraphs. And a little note, George Saunders published this story in a magazine called Story Magazine. And he said there that he had been driving past a house that actually had a pole like this. And he had invented who this man might be. And then he realized, you know what? That man might be entirely the opposite of what I think. And so he wrote the story about the opposite of what he first thought this decorator of the pole might be like. And that gave him the creative spark to, imagine the whole family and all the effects and so on. So that's just an interesting little tidbit. And alongside the story being published in the magazine, it had this note from the author. So I always find that fun to just, see what the author was inspired by, like what was the prompt, the seed of this story. Well, okay, I hope you enjoyed this story, even though it's kind of sad and bleak. um, yeah, but I really like it. I feel like it's saying something real about life, about emotions, and I'm taking away some wisdom from it. So I hope you can join me to talk about more poems or stories or whatever I end up talking about on my next video. Bye bye.